A 17-year-old student pilot with barely 30 hours of flight time suddenly finds himself at the controls of a commercial jet carrying 143 passengers through a violent thunderstorm after both pilots collapse unconscious. Everyone on board is certain they are about to die. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. And please like and subscribe for more videos like this. The morning started like any other Tuesday for Marcus Chen. He woke up at 6, brushed his teeth, grabbed his backpack, and headed to Lincoln High School for what he thought would be another ordinary day of classes. Marcus was 17, a senior with decent grades and a quiet demeanor that made him blend into the background of crowded hallways. But Marcus had a secret passion that consumed every free moment of his life. He was obsessed with flying. Not just watching planes take off from the nearby airport or playing flight simulator games on his computer. Marcus was actually learning to fly real aircraft at the small aviation school 20 miles outside the city. He had been saving money from his part-time job at the grocery store for 2 years to pay for lessons. Every Saturday and Sunday, he would drive his old sedan to Miller Field Aviation and spend hours in the cockpit of a tiny Cessna with his instructor, learning the fundamentals of flight. He had logged exactly 32 hours of flight time. Just 32 hours. Most commercial pilots have thousands of hours before they ever carry passengers. Marcus could barely land smoothly in perfect weather conditions. He had never flown in clouds. He had never experienced turbulence worse than a few gentle bumps. His instructor kept telling him he was progressing well, but Marcus knew the truth. He was still a beginner, still making rookie mistakes, still getting nervous during takeoffs. That Tuesday afternoon, Marcus finished his last class and decided to treat himself. He had been working double shifts all month and had a little extra money saved up. He booked a last-minute flight to visit his aunt in Denver for her birthday that weekend. The ticket was cheap because it was a connecting flight with a layover in Chicago. Marcus did not mind. He loved any excuse to be near airplanes, even as a passenger. He arrived at the airport 2 hours early, went through security, and found his gate. Flight 447 was scheduled to depart at 4:30 in the afternoon. The aircraft was a mid-sized jet, nothing fancy, but it could carry about 150 passengers. Marcus took his seat in row 23, right over the wing where he could watch the flaps move during takeoff. He always chose that seat when he could. As passengers filed in around him, Marcus pulled out his phone and reviewed some aviation theory notes he had saved. He was studying for his written exam, hoping to get his private pilot license in a few months. The flight attendants went through their safety demonstration. Marcus watched carefully, even though he had seen it dozens of times. He noticed details other passengers ignored. The location of emergency exits, the oxygen mask deployment, the flotation devices under the seats. The plane pushed back from the gate right on schedule. The engines spooled up, and Marcus felt that familiar excitement as they accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky. Everything seemed perfect. The weather was clear at departure. But the forecast for Chicago was showing some afternoon thunderstorms. 20 minutes into the flight, the captain made an announcement. They would be experiencing some weather ahead and might encounter turbulence. He asked the flight attendants to take their seats. Marcus looked out his window and saw dark clouds forming in the distance. Within minutes, the smooth flight turned rough. The plane started bouncing, not just gentle bumps but serious jolts that made overhead bins rattle and passengers gasp. Marcus was not scared. He understood that turbulence was normal, that planes were built to handle it. He actually found it interesting from a technical perspective. But then something happened that was not normal at all. The plane suddenly banked hard to the right, much sharper than any normal turn. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The aircraft leveled out, then tilted left just as aggressively. People started screaming. A flight attendant rushed toward the cockpit. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, ignoring the protests from the passenger next to him. His training kicked in. Something was very wrong. He moved down the aisle toward the front of the plane, holding onto seatbacks as the aircraft continued its erratic movements. A flight attendant tried to stop him, but Marcus pushed past. He reached the cockpit door just as another flight attendant was coming out, her face white with terror. Marcus looked inside and saw both pilots slumped over in their seats, unconscious. The control yoke was moving wildly. Alarms were blaring. The artificial horizon showed the plane in a steep bank. They were diving. Marcus did not think. He just acted. He pushed into the cockpit and threw himself into the captain's seat. The pilot's body was heavy, unresponsive. Marcus shoved him aside and grabbed the controls. His hands were shaking, but his mind was clear. He had done this 1,000 times in the simulator. But this was real. This was a jet with 143 people on board, not a tiny Cessna. The instruments looked similar but more complex. So many screens, so many buttons. Marcus pulled back on the yoke, trying to level the wings. The plane was not responding the way he expected. It was heavier, more resistant. He pulled harder, too hard. The nose pitched up sharply. Someone behind him screamed. Marcus pushed forward, overcorrecting. The plane dove again. He was oscillating, making it worse. He forced himself to breathe. Smooth inputs, small movements, like his instructor always said. He made a tiny adjustment to the right. The wings slowly leveled. He pulled back gently on the yoke. The dive stopped. The plane was flying straight, but they were still in the middle of a violent thunderstorm. Lightning flashed outside the windscreen. Rain hammered against the glass so hard Marcus could barely see. The turbulence was throwing the plane around like a toy. A flight attendant was shouting behind him, asking what was happening, asking if he knew how to fly this thing. Marcus did not answer. He was staring at the instruments, trying to remember everything he had learned. Airspeed, altitude, heading, attitude. He needed to get out of this storm. He needed to find clear air. Marcus looked at the radio panel. He had practiced radio calls dozens of times, but never in a situation like this. He pressed the transmit button. His voice cracked as he spoke. He identified the flight number and said they had an emergency. Both pilots were unconscious. A student pilot was at the controls. He needed help immediately. The response came back instantly. Air traffic control sounded shocked but professional. They asked for his experience level. Marcus told them the truth. 32 hours, all in a single-engine Cessna. He had never flown a jet. He had never flown in weather like this. There was a long pause. Then the controller's voice came back, steady and calm. He said his name was David, and that he was going to help Marcus through this. David told him to check the autopilot panel. Maybe they could engage the autopilot and let the computer fly. Marcus looked at the panel. There were so many switches. He found what he thought was the autopilot master switch and pressed it. Nothing happened. He tried another button. Still nothing. Either it was disengaged for a reason, or Marcus did not know how to activate it properly. David told him it was okay. They would do this manually. He would talk Marcus through every step. First, they needed to get out of the storm. David gave him a heading to turn to. Marcus gently turned the yoke. The plane banked smoothly this time. He was getting a feel for it. The jet was responding to his inputs. It was just a much bigger, faster version of what he had been flying. The principles were the same. For the next 40 minutes, Marcus flew through hell. The storm battered the aircraft from every direction. Wind shear pushed them up and down hundreds of feet in seconds. Marcus's hands ached from gripping the controls so tightly. Sweat poured down his face. But slowly, gradually, the turbulence began to ease. The clouds started to thin, and then suddenly they broke through into clear air. Sunlight flooded the cockpit. Marcus almost cried with relief. But the emergency was not over. He still had to land this plane. He had 143 people depending on him. David asked Marcus what his fuel situation looked like. Marcus scanned the panel and found the fuel gauges. They had enough for maybe another hour of flight. David said that was plenty. He was going to vector Marcus to a nearby airport with a long runway and emergency crews standing by. He was also connecting Marcus with a pilot from the airline who could provide specific guidance on this aircraft type. A new voice came over the radio. Captain Reynolds. He was a retired airline pilot with 40 years of experience. He said he was going to walk Marcus through the landing procedure step by step. They had time to do this right. Marcus listened carefully as Captain Reynolds explained the approach, the speeds he needed to maintain, the configuration of the flaps and landing gear, when to extend them, how to judge the descent rate. It was overwhelming, but Marcus wrote down everything on a notepad he found in the cockpit. The flight attendants had checked on the unconscious pilots. They were breathing but unresponsive. Possibly carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty air system, someone suggested. It did not matter right now. Marcus had to focus on flying. David vectored Marcus toward the airport. They were 30 miles out, then 20, then 10. Marcus could see the runway in the distance, a long strip of gray concrete. It looked impossibly small from this altitude. Captain Reynolds talked him through the descent. Reduce power. Drop the nose slightly. Maintain airspeed. Watch the altitude. Marcus followed every instruction exactly. He extended the flaps in stages, feeling the plane slow and become more stable. He lowered the landing gear. 3 green lights confirmed they were locked in place. 5 miles out, Marcus was lined up with the runway. His altitude and speed were good. Captain Reynolds was telling him he was doing great. Just keep it steady. 3 miles out, Marcus could see emergency vehicles lining both sides of the runway. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cars. The sight made his hands shake again. 2 miles out, the runway was getting closer, bigger. Marcus adjusted his descent rate. A little power, a little less nose down. 1 mile out, Captain Reynolds told him to start his flare soon. When he got close to the runway, he would need to pull back gently on the yoke to raise the nose and reduce the descent rate. 1/2 mile out. Marcus was too high. He could see it. He reduced power more. The plane started sinking faster. Maybe too fast now? He added a touch of power back. He was overcorrecting again, fighting the controls. He forced himself to relax, to feel the plane, to make smooth inputs. The runway rushed up to meet him. Marcus pulled back on the yoke. The nose lifted. The ground was right there. He pulled back more. The main wheels hit the runway with a heavy thud. The plane bounced back into the air. Marcus's heart stopped. He had ballooned the landing. But Captain Reynolds was already talking, telling him to just let it settle. Do not force it. Marcus held the nose up and let the plane come back down on its own. The wheels touched again, smoother this time. They stayed down. Marcus was on the runway. The plane was rolling. He needed to stop it. He remembered the brakes were on the top of the rudder pedals. He pressed his feet down, too hard. The plane lurched and skidded. He released pressure, then applied it more gently. The jet was slowing. The end of the runway was coming up fast, but they were decelerating, slower and slower, and then they stopped. The plane was motionless in the middle of the runway. Marcus sat frozen, his hands still on the controls. He could not believe what had just happened. Emergency crews swarmed the aircraft within seconds. Paramedics rushed on board to attend to the unconscious pilots. Fire crews checked the plane for any damage. Passengers were evacuated down emergency slides, shaken but unharmed. Every single person survived. Not one injury beyond some bruises from the rough landing. Marcus was led off the plane in a daze. His legs could barely hold him up. Someone wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, even though it was not cold. A paramedic checked his vital signs. Someone else was asking him questions, but he could not process the words. The next hours were a blur. Interviews with investigators, medical evaluations, phone calls with his parents who had heard the news and were frantic. The story spread fast. A 17-year-old student pilot with 32 hours of experience had landed a commercial jet in an emergency and saved 143 lives. The investigation later revealed that a faulty valve in the cockpit air system had caused both pilots to lose consciousness from oxygen deprivation. It was a rare mechanical failure that should have been caught during maintenance. The airline faced serious scrutiny, but that was not what people focused on. They focused on Marcus. Within days, he was being called a hero on every news channel. His face was on the front page of newspapers. He received messages from around the world. People called him brave, a natural pilot, a miracle. But Marcus did not feel like any of those things. When he finally had a quiet moment alone, he broke down and cried. Not from pride or joy, but from the weight of realizing how close they had all come to dying. How many tiny decisions had saved them. How easily it could have gone the other way. If he had panicked for even a moment. If he had overcorrected just a little bit more. If Captain Reynolds had not been available to guide him. If the weather had been worse. If the runway had been shorter. So many variables. Marcus went back to school the following week. His classmates treated him differently now. Some with admiration. Some with awkward distance, like he was no longer one of them. His teachers did not know what to say. The principal gave a speech about him in assembly. Marcus hated every second of it. He just wanted things to go back to normal. But normal was gone forever. He had changed. The world had changed around him. Flying had always been his escape, his passion, his dream. Now it was something else. It was responsibility. It was the knowledge that lives could depend on his decisions. That scared him more than the storm had. 6 months later, Marcus finished his private pilot license. Then he kept going. He earned his instrument rating, his commercial license, his multi-engine rating. He flew every chance he got, logging hours, building experience. People asked him if he was scared after what happened. He always said no. That was not quite true. He was terrified every time he climbed into a cockpit, but he did it anyway. Because 143 people had trusted him with their lives when he was just a kid who barely knew what he was doing. And somehow, against all odds, he had brought them home safely. That trust, that responsibility was something he could never walk away from. Marcus knew he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of that moment, trying to be the pilot those people believed he was when they were falling through the sky, and he was the only thing standing between them and disaster. Years later, Marcus became a commercial airline pilot himself. He flew the same routes he had traveled as a passenger. He sat in the same type of cockpit where he had fought to save a plane full of strangers. And every single time he took off, he thought about that Tuesday afternoon. The storm, the fear, the impossible choice. And he made a promise to himself and to every passenger who climbed aboard. He would be ready. He would be trained. He would never let his skills fade or his focus waver, because he knew, better than most pilots ever would, how quickly everything could go wrong, and how much it mattered to get it right. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this.